Ukraine's defiant struggle to drive out the invaders goes on, but the cost of defying Vladimir Putin is high, something also known only too well by the family of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny after his death in a brutal Arctic prison camp. Against this grim backdrop, President Biden today announced 500 sanctions on Russia. It's the biggest raft of sanctions unveiled at one fell swoop since the invasion and has been complemented by more penalties imposed by the EU. Mr. Biden was uncompromising. History, he said, is watching and the clock is ticking.
It is the question the West has struggled with for 2 long years. How to punish Vladimir Putin for his unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. The Russian president was laying a wreath at the walls of the Kremlin today, marking Moscow's victory over the Nazi invasion in World War II. Now having unleashed his own war of conquest. President Biden is trying to ensure that Putin pays a heavy price as the Ukraine war enters its 3rd year, pleading with Republicans in Congress to provide new funding and weaponry to Ukraine.
History's watching. The clock is ticking. Brave Ukrainian soldiers and civilians are dying. Russia is taking Ukraine territory for the first time in many months. Its failure to support Ukraine in this critical moment will never be forgotten in history. It will be measured, and it will have impact for decades to come.
The White House has taken its own steps, announcing today a fresh wave of sanctions against Russian companies that are linked to the Kremlin's war effort. One of the disturbing realities is that Russia's economy has proved remarkably resilient despite those Western sanctions. Following the death of Alexei Navalny, Putin's most powerful critic, penalties are also being imposed today on prison officials who run the Arctic penal colony where Navalny died. In all, 500 companies and individuals are being targeted. But the Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron, speaking at the United Nations, acknowledged later that the Kremlin has so far largely circumvented the sanctions.
On the Russian economy, I think the sanctions have had an effect. They are struggling to get some of the key technologies, some of the things that they need. But crucially, what we've got to do is follow this pattern around the world, because any country that is supplying dual-use goods to Russia, we need to make sure we're prepared to sanction companies in those countries.
Putin's defiance of Western economic pressure is on clear display. Yesterday, he even took to the skies aboard a Russian strategic bomber. The president in the cockpit of the Tupolev 160M. A stunt designed to send a message to the West, as well as to Russians, ahead of elections next month. Far below him to the southwest, on the front lines, Ukrainian and Russian soldiers continue to fight, and the casualties continue to mount, with no end in sight.
Robert, strong words from President Biden when he said that history is watching. I suspect probably a message to Congress, which is holding up more vital military aid to Ukraine. But is this all that the West can do at the moment, these 500 sanctions?
Well, Raggy, lots of critics are saying, look, this range, this sort of tranche of sanctions sounds impressive, 500 entities and individuals and Russian companies, but actually it's largely symbolic. These are companies that are not doing business in the West. They're Russian companies already largely untouched by these sanctions. And the other point, of course, is that the Russian economy has proved astonishingly adept at sort of recalibrating the way it does business, doing ever more energy trade with China and India and Brazil, for example. I mean, one more radical measure is definitely being actively debated here and in European capitals, which is namely, Raggy, seizing those $300 billion of Russian sovereign assets that are currently frozen largely in European banks and transferring them directly to Ukraine, effectively for reconstruction and reparations. Now, The legality and wisdom of doing that is, as I say, being debated, but it is an option. What the White House would really like more immediately is the House of Representatives here on Capitol Hill to pass that $60 billion of military aid urgently to Ukraine. You know, there is a sort of stalemate and a deadlock on Ukraine's front lines. There's also stalemate and deadlock here. I mean, the Ukrainians will undoubtedly welcome the sanctions package. What they would welcome much more is ammunition.
OK, Robert in Washington, thank you.